This teenager is accused of attacking and killing a paddleboarder on a quiet pond in Maine. His name is Deven Young, and he was reportedly on vacation with his family when he decided to attack Sonny Stewart. How police seem to catch on to him during their 2-week manhunt, and also, he's 17 years old. And there may be a debate over whether he should be tried as an adult in a case where he's accused of a brutal murder. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We're learning some shocking information about the teenager who was accused in the murder of paddleboarder Sunshine Stewart. She was killed, police say, on July 2nd. Here's the suspect. His name is Deven Young. He is 17 years old. Police say that Young was in the Crawford Pond area because he was on summer vacation with his family, and reportedly he was staying at the same campsite as Sunshine Stewart. Now, Young's Facebook page is no longer active. Someone took it down. But according to WGME, Young posted on his page 10 days after Sonny Stewart was murdered and police were on the hunt for the killer, and he replied to someone saying he was, quote, doing well. Young reportedly gave police some interesting stories during their investigation, which potentially led them in his direction. So let's break down that investigation and how we got to this point. First, it is so important to remember the victim in this story. Her name was Sunshine Stewart. Friends called her Sunny. She grew up in Union, Maine, which is roughly an hour and a half north of Portland, Maine, and that is where Crawford Pond is located. Friends say that Stewart had rented a camper for the summer, and she was planning to spend several weeks living at the Micmac campsite. That's a private campsite that's located on the north end of Crawford Pond. Stewart had reportedly held several jobs over the years. She was a boat captain. She worked in the lobstering industry, but she most recently was a contractor. Above all, she just loved the outdoors. But police say on July 2nd, between 6 and 9 p.m., Stewart went out on the pond to paddleboard. And when she didn't come back, that is when the authorities were called and this mystery began. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, her body was found. According to the Mid-Coast Villager newspaper, her body was found on the south end of the island in the middle of the pond, not too far from the shore. And she was also not far from her paddleboard. Police called in the Major Crimes Unit. Stewart's death was ruled a homicide. Initially, her cause of death was withheld until police made an arrest. They're now saying that Stewart was killed by a combination of blunt force trauma and strangulation. This was a violent murder. So here's what we know about how investigators came in contact with the suspect, Deven Young. The owner of the Micmac campground told ABC News that she cooperated with the investigation, but also it was notable that the 17-year-old seemed to be very cooperative when police were at the campsite. She claims that Young told investigators that he had information that might help with their case and their search for Sunshine Stewart's killer. And he then took investigators out on the water, and they went in the opposite direction of where Sonny Stewart was found. In the words of the campground owner, Young took them on a, quote, wild goose chase. Now, it's unclear exactly what Young may have said that led police directly to him, but the owner of the campsite said that investigators spoke to him on July 16th. They left and then returned a few hours later, and they went straight to where his family was staying at the campsite, and then he was arrested in the 10 o'clock hour, July 16th in the evening, without incident, was put under arrest, and is now accused in the murder of Sonny Stewart. Young is originally from Frankfort, Maine. That's about an hour away from Crawford Pond. Again, he came with his parents on vacation and allegedly committed this murder. One of his friends told the Bangor Daily News that Young did seem a little, quote, off in June. That's when they last spoke, but that friend also said that there was nothing that would have made him think that Young would allegedly murder someone. Two other people who knew Young from school spoke to the outlet on the condition of anonymity, and he had been a bully since preschool, and he was known for getting into fights. Young is currently being held at a youth detention center outside Portland, Maine, and he already made his first court appearance. Now, even though he is 3 months shy of his 18th birthday, it's not clear whether he's going to be tried as an adult in this murder case. Prosecutors have filed a motion to have Young tried as an adult, but a judge is going to have the final say on that, and it's unclear when the judge could make that decision. Prosecutors have filed a motion to have Young tried as an adult, but a judge will have the final say on that, and it's unclear when a judge could make that decision. According to Maine state law, a hearing needs to be held where the court will look at factors like how violent the crime was, whether Young is a danger to others, and if he has a criminal history in determining whether he'll be tried as a juvenile or an adult. Now, if he's tried as an adult and he's found guilty, he could receive 25 years to life in prison. But if he is tried as a juvenile, and this surprised me, according to WMTW in Maine, if he's found guilty as a juvenile, he can only be held until he's 21 years old, no matter how serious the crime. Young is expected to be in court for an arraignment on August 22nd. It's important to note that he'll turn 18 and would be legally an adult in September. Although Young is now in custody, Maine State Police say this is still an active and ongoing investigation, so they're still looking for anyone with information, anyone who may have saw Sunshine Stewart on July 2nd when she went paddleboarding, to send information to Maine State Police. And as friends continue to remember Sunshine Stewart, they continue to raise money for funeral expenses, and you can just see how much money they have raised at the time of this recording. Joining us now to talk more about this case is retired NYPD Detective Tom Smith, also the co-host of the Gold Shields podcast. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. We talked about this search for a killer a couple weeks ago when it just began, and now they've made this arrest of Deven Young. What stands out to you with the information we have about how they honed in on this guy?
Well, you know what? It's very troubling, and it happens a lot when you have someone that was involved in a crime like this participating in the search and in somewhat of the investigation, because they like to keep their pulse on it to see what people are talking about and what direction they're going in. So this is not the first time this has happened, but when you have a kid like this steps over that line where investigators are by nature suspicious, when people are so upfront about wanting to help. And it just unraveled really quick for this kid, and great job by the detectives that were involved in this.
Yeah, because one, and we don't know specifically what he may have said that led investigators in their direction, but what stands out to you when someone says, not only do I have information and I want to help, but it seems like he pointed them in the exact opposite direction, total 180 of where Sunshine Stewart's body was found?
Yeah, well, the very first thing, Chris, is I have information. That's very, upfront for a kid to have a kind of earth-shattering piece of information that would lead investigators in this case. So right from the front, that would get my radar up. When someone just jumps out of nowhere and says, I have information on this, when me and you have talked about it, there wasn't a lot of information that was out there. So for someone to come up with something like that is alarming, and something that would, again, put my radar up. But then, like you said, leading them in the total opposite direction of where this case was just, again, enhances your suspicion of this, to the point of then you start questioning him, and really quick it's going to unravel on him, which it did.
One thing we talked about in the beginning was that Crawford Pond, where all of this took place, that there wasn't public property for someone to access the pond, that they would have to have either owned a home with, some waterfront property, or they would have to be someone staying at the campsite, which, according to police, is what Deven Young was doing. He was on family vacation, which is just a wild part of this story as well. Let's go there, because he's 17, he's on family vacation, and Sunshine Stewart just goes out paddleboarding. I know you can't really make sense of some of these crimes because it's in a whole different world from what normal people kind of operate in mentally. But what do you take away from that part of it?
It's scary. When you have someone like that is lurking and out there, and there's no way this was the first time this popped into this kid's head. This is not a impulsive thing. It was planned. It was targeted. He saw someone vulnerable and took advantage of it. So to go into the background of this individual is going to be important, to see what other motives he had, what other thoughts he had leading up to this. And as you said earlier, and I think we discussed this on the first show we did, the fact that it's an inclusive place narrows the search down of who might have been responsible for it, which does make it easier for detectives, because someone there was the perpetrator, and that's the way it ended up being.
And touching on just him as like, this can't be the first time
No.
that he would have at least thought about it. And when these cases happen, you see through local media, there's some anecdotes that come out. One friend said he seemed off. Another one said he was a bully at school. But there's a huge leap from the kid was a bully at school, getting into fights, picking on people. And look, that's awful if people do that. But then it's a huge leap to, I see this paddleboarder and I'm going to murder her, which is what he's accused of doing. In your experience dealing with people like this, what is the leap? How does it get to that point where they're even thinking about this stuff?
It could be a lot of things, Chris. And we've had discussions on this with impulsive murders and planned murders. It could be a variety of things. One thing could have set him off that morning, or that evening. Something he watched, something he read, someone else being famous about a murder that they committed. There's so many things that go into this that me and you here are not going to get into this kid's brain. And that's the disturbing part of this, that it's so quick and can happen so fast. And that's the scary part for people who are around this kid.
And it's at this point, we don't know a motive. We don't know what he has said to investigators. He's being held at a juvenile detention facility right now. We can get into kind of the adult versus juvenile part of it in a moment. But what is the process? So you have this 17-year-old, you've made this arrest. What is the process of figuring out how this all went down?
Well, the way it went down is just going to be a timeline, and I know the director of the location helped out with videos and putting him in the same area at the same time, which does help investigators. So that's crucial, because you have to build a timeline of the victim and the perpetrator to make sure they cross paths, and that's a prosecution thing that they're going to go into. But that is very important. The adult part and juvenile part plays out in court with laws that are on the books, there, and the severity of the crime. What leads to charging him as an adult, which I feel completely should happen. That shouldn't even be an issue with this, because doesn't matter what age you are responsible and have to be held accountable for your actions and your crimes. And this is certainly one of them, because this was not like I said, instinctive thing. This was planned. This was somewhat hunted. This is a maniacal person who was hell-bent on just killing this person.
It's exactly. And they had no previous relationship that we understand. Not that that would make it any better, but he went out, saw a paddleboarder, and allegedly decided to kill her. There hasn't been a timeline yet of when the judge could make a decision on whether he'll be tried as an adult, but I think his next hearing is August 22nd. He's going to turn 18 in September. So it seems like it's almost semantics to treat him as a 17-year-old as opposed to an 18-year-old. I did find this was something that I was very shocked by, where if he was tried as an adult and he's found guilty, that would be 25 years to life. But if he's found guilty as a juvenile, he can only be held until he's 21 years old, no matter how serious the crime. How is it that you can have such a major difference if someone even was 16 years old and committed this crime, that if they were tried as a juvenile, that they could just be looking at a couple years in a juvenile detention facility?
Yeah, you're right. And that's why it's so important to charge him as an adult. And those laws stretch around this country from state to state, with the difference in time that they can do if prosecuted, if found guilty. It's absurd, because, in my mind, your age doesn't matter. It's your actions, and it's your thoughts and your actions, and what is out there that you ended someone's life. And that has to be the bottom line in this. And hopefully they come to the right conclusion, which I think they will, because of the circumstances of the crime, that he has to be charged as an adult in this.
And, 17 years old, I feel like it's often not to group him in with other cases we've seen, but we've talked about teenagers who it just seems like these cases happen all too often, whether it's a school shooting, whether it's a case like this. Do you feel like these cases involving teenagers seem to be happening more than in decades past?
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely. And, again, we could sit here all day and try to figure it out, and we're probably not going to come up with an answer. From social media, from the celebrityism of killers these days and what they're treated like. That all goes into it as well, and notoriety. Medications that are given. I mean, we can go on and on and on with why these happen, but there's certainly a rise in this over the past, let's say, decade or so from what it used to be.
If he is not talking, I don't know if he's talking to investigators. He was clearly talking to investigators during the investigation. But what are the pieces of forensic evidence that law enforcement needs to have as they build a case against him? If he says, "Hey, I'm getting a lawyer, I'm not going to talk."
Yeah, well, any piece of evidence that links him to the crime scene or the victim. The videos are going to be important. Are they rock solid? No, but they do put into play that they're in the same area at the same time. So forensically, it's going to be, just what was gathered, what was collected as far as evidence goes, linking these two together. Statements he makes obviously are going to be, really important, and those they're going to kind of keep probably close to them until needed, of what conversations were taking place while they were searching with him. What was his attitude? What was his actions like when he was together with the police, leading them on this wild goose chase in the wrong direction? So all of that is going to be documented and put into evidence, and will hopefully make a strong case.
And when you're building a case, and I know that people were volunteering their DNA, this was blunt force trauma and strangulation as a cause of death. So I would guess that there's some sort of DNA evidence that could link him to that. But if he made a statement at that campsite and maybe he even confessed to doing it, can you get a conviction with just a confession and not having strong forensic evidence?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Because there's going to be enough. Listen, they've done this before, piecing things together, maybe circumstantially, but gathering enough of that plus the statements to put a strong case together. Absolutely. And statements are big. They are the perpetrator speaking his own mind, and you can't get around that. He can't take them back. So it's just a matter of putting all that together into a package for the prosecutors to go forward in this. But I think they're going to gather enough to do that.
When you work in law enforcement, I feel like you have to do a really good job compartmentalizing the emotions of the situation. But what would the emotions be like if Deven Young comes up to you saying he has information, and then suddenly you're like, wait a second, I think this is the guy who did it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, detectives, when you're searching for people, you have to keep in your mind, and we all know this, that perpetrators get involved in investigations a lot. Look at Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson, created a search party that he was involved in looking for Lacey when he knew she was dead. So there's so many examples of perpetrators being involved in searches and making phone calls to drop hints on, possible cracks in the case. But it's their warped way of being involved in this that investigators are always going to be on the lookout for. And I am sure there was one thing he said or did that completely changed the detectives or investigators' attitude when it came to him. Because that's always the way it works. You're walking around, you're looking, and then one thing is said that he's not prepared for, and it flipped on him real quick.
And apparently he went and he spoke to investigators on July 16th. They leave, and then they come back a couple hours later, and that's when the campground owner said that they were going to make an arrest, or they had made an arrest and went to go talk to him. What is the process of, okay, we gathered our information, couple hours pass, and then they come back? What are they typically doing during those couple hours, investigators, and kind of reaching the conclusion that an arrest is what they're going to do?
Making sure. I mean, you want to be right. You don't want to make a mistake and jump too soon or grab the wrong person. You want to be sure. So all that was either checking all the boxes, getting the team together, which is the prosecutors, detectives, evidence collection teams, whoever it might be, and getting in one location and going over everything you think you have on this kid and making sure you're right. Because all that, remember, I've said it on your show numerous times, Chris, the prosecution and the trial begins real early in the crime scene, in interviews and all that. So you want to make sure you're starting to build a case as early as possible to get the right person.
And lastly, in this, two very different cases in a lot of ways, but there's similarities. Brian Koberger's top of mind this week. I think of this case, and in both those situations, Brian Koberger was a PhD student in criminology, and he tried to clean up the crime scene. He clearly made some big mistakes, like leaving the knife sheath behind and all of that. But he's trying to cover up his tracks. Deven Young thinks that he's going to help investigators and lead them in the other direction. Typically, what is the biggest mistake that suspects make when they think they can outsmart police?
Talking too much. That's the number one thing. And I think I've said it on your show. When you have a suspect, let them talk, because they're gonna goof up, because they're not prepared for that, Chris. That's the whole thing. You can plan a murder, you can commit the murder, but it's the afterwards thing that they cannot plan for. You cannot plan for the actions of the detectives or the questioning that detectives are going to come up with. You can't game plan that. And that's where these people always get messed up. They just overthink. They think they're smarter, which they're not. And they're not prepared for answering questions later on down the line of what detectives are going to have for them. And that's generally when they get them.
All right, Tom Smith, co-host of the Gold Shields podcast, retired NYPD detective. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. We'll see how this case plays out.
You got it. Thanks again, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.